our show.
On this night, we rise.
This is the bleeding edge of science, technology, and ethics. This is
Pollution, unwilling to submit.
We learn all that is learnable.
Tonight, power shifts. Tonight, we raise our instruments of anarchy.
Peaceful coexistence, encryption, software, secure devices, and our minds.
Tonight, we are unbound by law.
It's time for Sovryn Tech. And now your host, the golden stallion of the tech world, the rated R radio star, Brian Sovryn.
You know it, baby. The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, the man that some call the most interesting anarchist in the world today, is here for you for another Sovryn Tech, baby. And I am so excited about this one because, you know, it's very rare. Okay. I get a lot of people, they want to be on the show, blah, blah, blah. You know, I get asked about this sort of thing. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, I'd love to have all these different people on the show. But what happens is, you know, they wants to be done over Skype, you know, or whatever system they have. And it's just like, yeah, it just doesn't feel right. I mean, if it's important enough, I'll do it. But I like having people right in the studio. I like having guests right in front of me so we can look at each other, we can actually talk, we can respond, because there's so much more than words to everything, you know. And so it's really great when I actually get to have full-on guests right in the studio with me, and this week I get to do that. And it's also a pleasure because I consider this person a friend, and so it's great to have them here, and somebody that is exceptionally knowledgeable in matters that are very important to the Sovryn Tech audience. So, in fact, recently, well, as much as I, you know, steer from it here and there, blockchain technology in particular has been something that's come up quite a bit. Talked about Arcade City, ripped on Ethereum quite a bit. Ooh, we might get into that in this episode. You know, I mean, all the different things that we talk about. But, you know, I usually stay away from it. But just recently, I've noticed that in various episodes, well, it's come up pretty much every week. And, of course, a lot of people really enjoyed my appearance on the Crypto Show recently. Really, really honored to have been on that. And I know a lot of new listeners have come in from that audience. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the cabal, as I say. So we're going to get into a lot of blockchain stuff in this episode. I'm just letting you know out of the gate, but maybe we'll get into some other things too. Maybe some fun stuff towards the end, if all goes according to plan. So, but anyway, why don't I, without further ado, as they say, why don't I introduce my guest, Tur Demeester. It is a pleasure to have you on the show. Now you are, well, why don't you go ahead? How would you describe what you're doing today? Because I follow you on Twitter. And I mean, as far as, you know, there's a few people, I have like this special list of people that I follow, and there's very few people in it. Okay. But they're people that I learn from, and you are on that list. Okay. And I mean, you live and breathe blockchain news, Bitcoin news, and all of this. So, but I mean, why don't you tell people, you know, a little bit about more, you know, what you're doing right now? Like, you know, if they followed you on Twitter, and do mention your Twitter handle, you know, what are they going to see? What are they going to experience of Tur?
So I'm all about financial freedom and how to achieve that for myself, and I like to help other people do that too. And the way I do that for myself is just think about like what are good investments, what makes sense. And I happen to have stumbled into Bitcoin back in 2011, and I just kept following the space and got more and more just engrossed and excited, and also like financially invested. And so like I'm kind of I don't know how to say this. It's like it's kind of, I'm like intertwined with it. And
Yeah.
so I really want to keep up with what's happening. If there's a new project out that could displace Bitcoin, I want to know all about it, and I'll lose sleep over it in researching it and figuring out what's going on. And so that ongoing process is just, that's reflected in just what I do on Twitter, is just whatever I find interesting or worth sharing, always kind of with in mind that this could be relevant for from an investment point of view, but that doesn't mean just like, oh, is it going to make me a profit or not? It's also like, it helps me understand the psychology of what's going on. It helps me prepare better for, the next possible event that could happen, or it could help me be well positioned long term in over the span of 10, 20 years.
Sure.
So I like many different angles.
Sure. So this is, so your goal, is showing personal freedom, more the financial angle, and more particularly with cryptocurrencies. Yeah. And, and all the whole digital thing.
Right. I do think that having some view on what's happening macro, so to speak, in the, in the world and the global economy is really important, even if your focus is only Bitcoin, because the two, they're like communicating vessels. They are going to influence each other. Yeah,
they report on each other in many real ways. Right. I totally agree with that. I think, your insights have been tremendous over the years. I've enjoyed, seeing them. What is your Twitter handle? We'll put it in the show notes. This will be episode 196. What would be, spell out your Twitter handle for everybody?
Yeah, it's just my full name. So it's like TUURDEM for Madrid, EESTER.
Bingo. Okay. It'll be in the show notes for episode 196. Don't hesitate to look that up. So you're into, personal finance, personal financial freedom, personal freedom in general, which is, that's one of the major goals for Sovryn Tech, no doubt about it. I love, and I think you'd probably agree with me, that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general are a big part of this. I love the technologies that excite me are the ones that turn people into one-person economies and, even one-person countries. I hate to use the word country, but, it's a good shorthand to explain where people are, the individual gets empowered.
Right.
And I think cryptocurrencies are so key to that. So many things that I even talk about on this show, they just wouldn't be possible if Bitcoin didn't exist. Right. The ability to, or even other cryptocurrencies, the ability to do, pay for things anonymously, and all of this. It changed the game for what you can do, say, against the surveillance state, surveillance society, and all of this different stuff. Which leads me to another, where I want to start with you, Tur, is you're an anarchist. Yeah. Like myself, yeah. There's a big smile on that face, folks. How did you become an anarchist? I think a lot of people are very curious, what is the mental progression that happens? And I always find it to be an interesting story. So if you've got not the terribly long version, but I am curious, how did you become an anarchist?
So in my family, politics were never really discussed, so I didn't really know about it at all.
Which, by the way, I think we should bring that up. You're from Europe.
Yeah.
So, not an American voice here, if you couldn't tell by the accent in the first place. But okay, so you're from Europe. So that's sort of a different. My audience is all around the world, I think the most popular countries, of course, America's at the top of the list, then Canada, then Russia, and then it turns into various European countries, including Denmark, of all things. So anyway, but okay, so you're from Europe, so that's an important starting point, but all right, continue. Your family, go on.
Yeah, not that much into politics at all, so I knew it was something I didn't know about.
Sure.
And so then entering in university, there were some basically student clubs, and I got friendly with some people who were into classical liberalism, but I didn't really know that much about it. What really, I think, there were two main things that happened for me. One was I got involved in starting a little private school that was inspired on Sudbury Valley School, actually not too far from here in Massachusetts, Framingham.
Oh, yeah. John Dewey, all that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I got involved in starting that, and then I discovered that not only was it very difficult, not only were these schools just not subsidized like all the other schools, but often governments would actually actively boycott them. And that really was very shocking to me, that something that made so much sense to me would be like, I always thought that the government was supposed to be something benign or helpful, even though I didn't know much about it.
Yeah,
that
the government's it's just supposed to be a back end, right? It's not supposed to be so involved. But clearly, governments hate alternative forms of education.
Right.
Sure.
So that was a big shock for me. The other thing was that friends of mine were involved in kind of a bootstrap movement for direct democracy. They really loved the Swiss model and referenda and all that stuff. And so as we dived deeper into the theory, because we were kind of academically bent with aspirations and philosophy and all that. So we focused a lot on well, what is the theory behind this? Well, why is it, why is this the best system?
Right.
And so I remember just being on the bike with this friend of mine, and we were talking and I was asking so what is really what is the contract? How does this all start? How do you start from a little Robinson Crusoe island situation towards what we have maybe even in Switzerland? How does that social contract start? And then he was like, yeah, well, it's a social contract. And we both realized we're not getting anywhere. There is no social contract. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So that was the click for me. And then obviously after that, there was, human action, and there was a whole bunch of Rothbard and a lot of literature that helped me kind of fill in the blanks of why, why government really is just a bunch of people. It's not something different than a collection of individuals. And why would those people have more rights than anybody else?
Yeah. I always love the phrasing, or the phrase, I guess I should say, that there really is no such thing as government. There's just other people wanting to rule other people, and then that's I think that was KRS-One or something that said that, but that's right on the money.
And before him, Mises.
Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. I mean, Mises is brilliant. Human action. I mean, so many of his books, Socialism, a lot of those different ones are just fantastic write-ups. So, I mean, that's definitely a great way to find out about these ideas, is through what he had to say. In fact, I don't even think all of his writings have really been fully explored to their, I guess what you could say is their logical conclusion. I know a lot of people want to say Rothbard took it all the way, but I think there's more. I think there's other things to explore on that. But anyway, that's not the point here. So that's how you ended up becoming an anarchist out of all that. I mean, pretty much it started sort of with the education system. Is that the gist?
Yeah, that was where I felt the fist for the first time. This is, wow, this is just, literally talking to this German man who was a teacher in the south of, in the middle of nowhere, in the south of Germany, where there were no schools. Him was a teacher, his wife was a teacher, and they were homeschooling their kids. And they literally had to flee to the UK to be able to continue to do that because they got fined and they were threatened with jail because homeschooling since the Hitler times is illegal in many places in Germany.
Unbelievable.
So that was I don't know, I was in my early 20s, this is wrong. This is not some, this is not the Middle East or some country that I associate with maybe a banana republic. This is in Europe. It's supposedly the most civilized place in Europe even. Who knows? Right.
But then you're still feeling the jackboot effectively.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something. And I mean, how long did the process take, for you to become, go from that to being a full-on anarchist? What was the time frame?
I feel there was I don't know, it was this thing where, a referendum makes sense. And, just I don't know, I feel it was a day. It was just
it was just a day.
It was just it doesn't make sense. Social contract doesn't make sense. And then it was just kind of this shock, but the rest was just kind of filling out all the blanks rather than going back and forth. I didn't feel I hesitated a lot.
Yeah, I sort of hear this a lot, and maybe to some degree, maybe I was the same to some degree. I wouldn't claim it all the way, but of course, I'm in New Hampshire, and which means we're all in New Hampshire right now doing this show. But a lot of people come here for the Free State Project and all that, and you ask them how did they get into liberty, and usually kind of the first statement is just that they sort of always were. They never heard anybody actually talk about it, actually give the kind of the logical case perhaps, or just express it in some way. And once they do, then they're like, aha, that's what I am. They've always known. And I mean, I tell this story often, but I just remember watching Stossel. This was a few years ago. This would have been I don't know, 08. Or no, it would have been maybe 09, 2010, something like that. And they had Judge Andrew Napolitano. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Sure, yeah. And he was on Stossel, and he was actually debating P.J. O'Rourke, who is this other kind of famous libertarian author. And it was just amazing. They were asking, Stossel was asking them, like, so if we don't have government, how are we going to have this? How are we going to have this? And he got to the question about the military, or about the Navy in particular, because I guess that was important because in the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't really originally up until like the, late 19th century, it didn't say you could have a standing army. It said you could have a Navy, but you couldn't have a standing army. Anyway. So Stossel asks Napolitano, who is an anarchist, Mises Institute, all that, asked him, what would you do if you don't have a government, if you don't have a state? It's like, where would you have a Navy? And I just remember Napolitano, so just point blank, looked him right in the eye, national television, millions of people watching, just said, who says you need a Navy? And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, right. Who says you need a Navy?
Right.
And like right there, I just became an anarchist just like that. I was like, just to hear somebody finally say, yeah, who says you need it? And to say it and not like, nobody looked at him like he was nuts. I mean, the crowd was kind of like, ooh, but it wasn't, it was just flat. And this guy was obviously, a very intelligent person, and to make that claim, it just really validated, I think, a lot of what was inside myself, so that happens. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I actually remember when I was 16, we had this like history teacher, and he was like, making the case, and he was going to illustrate the case by like asking the class a question. It's like, oh, well, what would you do if, I don't know if it was the Germans that some foreign armies like at our gates again, because it happened, right, in the Second World War. So what if it happens again? And there's a conscription, like, what would you do? And I remember, I think there was one or two other guys who were like, I wouldn't join, like, I would run. I would just like, that was my first thought, like,
right.
Why would I, like, who am I, why is it my responsibility to like defend my neighbors or something? Like, why shouldn't I just go and like have other people join me, and then when the madness has subsided, I'll come back and like check it out. Like, it just, I don't know, like this whole thing of like duty tied to some geographical piece of earth. Like, why?
It's ridiculous.
It's religious to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like a lot of the real, especially long-term successes, financial successes, I guess you could say, in the world, have been from groups that don't stand and fight. They run.
Right.
Like you think of the Jews that ran to, Switzerland or whatever, and I mean, just became, very successful watchmakers or even, with banks, whatever it ends up happening to be. I mean, I could think of a ton of groups, the Wesleyans that ran off into the, into the Alps, when the Catholics were coming, to kill them or something, but they ended up being very successful. And, I mean, there's tons and tons of groups that you can look at where if they ran away, they lived on another day, and they didn't just live on, they fucking thrived.
Right. Yeah. Like, how about seeing war as like a symptom that maybe something's off in the social fabric today.
Right.
Of this geographical area, things got so insane, people start shooting at each other, like, with flags and stuff. Like, let's get out of here. And I think, I
never thought about it that way, but like, if there is war, consider the land diseased, and it's time to leave.
Maybe you don't want to live in Iraq right now, right? Maybe,
right? Yeah, I mean, anyway, I think that's an interesting kind of side story there. So, well, in any case, I'm glad you're an anarchist because, like I said, I think you have a lot of insights to deliver, that I personally enjoy. So, why don't we start getting into it? Because I think, your speciality would be in the blockchain space, kind of what we described before. And in fact, I remember the first time I met you, you might not even remember this, but I met you, it was in San Jose. At the very first, that was like the big major Bitcoin conference. The first one was that 2013?
I would 13 in May 2013.
Yes,
that was a landmark conference. I really think that is going to be like remembered as one of the first serious gatherings. People were actually, when I was there, some people said like, this to me feels like, and I don't remember the name of it, but there's like one of those very first Silicon Valley internet conferences that was like boom, and there were 900 people there, I think. Yeah, I think it was huge. And there was, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of careers got made there. Yeah. I remember Andreas Antonopoulos, good friend. Yeah. He was there. Nobody knew him.
No, right. But I remember the panel he was on, and he just, verbally ripped these people to shreds. And it was brilliant. and that's when he kind of started his other 6 billion shtick, and everything, all of which is great. Very, very powerful message to get out there. That was a big deal there. But I remember meeting you there for the first time. I remember actually I met, someone else that Sovereign Tech listeners will know very well. I think that was the first time I met Paige Peterson, who is now working with Zcash, which I find to be a very exciting technology. We might get into that a little bit. You were there. I mean, that was a big deal. I remember meeting Mike Hearn. Oh boy, talk about a name. that guy. Whoa, what a piece of work. And
Mt. Gox being like the talk of the town because they weren't there.
Right. Yeah.
People were saying that they were being sued and that's why they didn't travel to the U.S.
Yeah. And I remember also, in fact, we might touch on this because I know this is something you've been looking at. That's a play on your part recently. Ripple was a huge deal at that event. Like that was being talked about as the Bitcoin killer.
I remember them having the double booth.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah.
Like that, XRP. Everybody. I mean, those were the 3 letters on people's lips.
Right.
There was XRP. That was something. So we've been in this game for a while. I think that's the moral of that story. And of course, I mean, like you said, you've been into Bitcoin since 2011. Is that accurate?
Yeah, like reading about it, hearing about it. Yeah, like the earliest I could find was like April 2011.
Yeah. I think it's about the same for me.
Actually, 2 years before that, I went to London to the Libertarian Alliance conference. And guess who's there? It was...
wow, how many people were there? Like 5?
Oh, yeah, man. It was like 100 people. But David Friedman was there, the son of Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
He actually described the concept of the assassination market.
Okay.
Anonymous crypto cash.
Right, which is
ironic that like he could have been a billionaire because he was onto these ideas in 2009.
Yeah.
And then all the way up until 2013-14, people asked David Friedman about Bitcoin, and he's kind of like, meh. I never got that why he didn't understand his own foresight.
Yeah,
and his dad's.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I mean, his dad's an interesting character because even his dad would say, "Oh yeah, no, you want something like the Fed," and it's like, "Oh, come on, man." As much as Free to Choose was such a great documentary series, Milton Friedman. I'm not saying he's not brilliant, but I mean, speaking of, we mentioned Mises earlier. I remember I love the story where they were, I guess, Milton Friedman and a bunch of these guys. This would have been back, I guess, maybe in the 50s or 60s or something, and they're all in a room, kind of talking to each other about all this stuff, and they're talking about taxes and everything, sort of the validity of that, and there's kind of this story where Mises just kind of walks in the room and hears what they're talking about, just like kind of stomps down his cane and says, "You're a bunch of socialists," and just walks out of the room. So
yes.
I thought that was pretty cute.
Yeah, and then they asked him like, "What would you do if you were in charge?" He's like, "Abdicate."
Yeah, that's great. So we've been in this game for a while. You've been in this game, for a good long while, and certainly I think in many ways you've been in it much deeper than even I have, and you really keep a very close eye. Like you're hyper focused, in this space, which myself and with Sovereign Tech in general, I have to keep a kind of a broader scope. So which is why I like to have guys with some serious expertise, some serious cred, on the show. I mentioned earlier I was on the crypto show recently, and kind of one of the points that I brought up was, and this is the first topic I really want to get into, because my listeners know Bitcoin; they don't need an introduction to that. But we were talking about coins that are going to fail, things that are going to fail, and the subject came up about Ethereum. And I said that, and we're going to get into that, but I was like, yeah, I think Ethereum's just going to crash. Like it can't survive this. The reason I said, if the same thing that happened with Ethereum, with the DAO, with ETC, with Ethereum Classic and all that, I said, if that similar thing happened with Bitcoin would, I don't think would suffer the same fate that I think Ethereum's going to suffer. I was like, Bitcoin will go on. And I said, and the reason that is that unlike Ethereum, people see the need for Bitcoin. They see, something that is Bitcoin-esque. They see the need for that kind of governmentless currency. Okay, and that works well with the digital economy that everybody is, using today, pretty much. As to where with Ethereum, all the ideas that comprise Ethereum and all that, nobody asks for that shit. Like, nobody. If it goes away, the world will continue on, no problem. Nobody really sees the need. And necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. I feel like Bitcoin, would survive. But now a lot of people today are, and I've seen write-ups on various Bitcoin news sites, I mean, are making the claim that, hey, Bitcoin's not growing. What's going on with Bitcoin? It doesn't seem that exciting. I mean, when you hear that kind of verbiage, and you can tell me if you don't ever hear that sort of thing, I mean, maybe I'm getting the wrong take, but like, how do you respond to that? What do you think's going on with Bitcoin particularly right now? And then I want to, branch out into Ethereum and a bunch of other stuff.
Right. Well, to put it very, I don't even know the word. To put it very poetic, okay. I think Bitcoin was a big caterpillar, and now it's in the cocoon phase, and it's going to become a beautiful butterfly.
I agree. Keep going. Yeah.
So, yeah, I really think, so there's just a lot of groundwork has to be done to basically build the bridges towards second level, higher level protocols. So the Bitcoin rails, they can do quite a bit, and they move quite a lot of volume. If you look at it in dollar values, you're talking about a couple billion a year actually that is being moved on the blockchain. But of course, if you want to move to Visa type transaction speeds, then you're going to need some different technology. And the question is how do you keep Bitcoin decentralized? How do you keep these different faster technologies? How do you allow for that to be decentralized too? It just takes time to really build those bridges. Right. And and there was a number of optimizations that needed to happen for these next, basically a bunch of bottlenecks that kind of all the bottlenecks had to be widened, and then you can have the next stage, which is so to speak the butterfly stage. Yeah. And a lot of people who are kind of looking at it from a distance, they see stagnation, but they don't see the commits. They don't see all the testing that's being done on the Bitcoin code. They don't see the actual improvements that are happening, and that are happening not just kind of randomly or haphazardly. They are happening with a very long-term, robust future for Bitcoin in mind, and that it just takes time to do that right.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with everything you just said, that I think that's exactly what's going on. And I like the fact that they're taking the time, that they're even quiet about it, because I don't need any more flash in the pans. I don't need any more Me Too's. I don't need any more things that are oh, this is very exciting, and then it fizzles out inside of a month, and all this. I want the stuff that's quiet, and that's, this really giant slow build that I think that can be a beautiful thing. I remember Tim Draper, who is the guy that, he's known for being one of the smarter VCs in the world. And he was also the guy that was touting that, 6-state solution in California, where he wanted to break it up into 6 states and all this. And he's the guy who is also probably best known for acquiring most of,
FBI coin.
Yeah, FBI coin, exactly. The coin from DPR, from Silk Road. But he has made the claim. He made the claim 2 years ago that he expects Bitcoin to be worth 10,000 a coin inside of 3 years. So we got about a year before that's supposed to happen. And his point was the same, was that, look, you don't understand. There are at least, he gave his metrics saying there's at least 500 companies that are building the infrastructure for Bitcoin right now, and they are going to take that amount of time. That's why he said 3 years. He said, because they'll be done in 3 years. I mean, even if he's off by a year, I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think Bitcoin, say 2017, 2018 could be worth 10,000? I mean, it's just, this is just a random guess. It doesn't have to no one's going to hold it against you, or at least I won't let them.
Yeah, I think it would be another order of magnitude, basically. These jumps, 10x jumps, it's not unheard of when you look at platforms that experience parabolic growth, even social networks, and just the network effect is a real thing. Right. And as long as the ecosystem and the protocols are sufficiently robust, then that's going to happen, and you are going to have overshoots. So talking about north of 10,000, I don't think is absurd, because it's a given. You're going to have overshoots. Right now, I think Bitcoin is undervalued. Well, maybe 1,000 is the right value right now. Who knows? Sure. But when that enthusiasm and that thing starts moving, a lot of new people jump on board who have no idea what they're doing, but they're buying it anyway. Right. So it's pushing it up more, and then of course there's the euphoria stage, and then you get the hangover again, and so it's just going to keep happening with and every stage brings about, it's kind of if you look at the history of railroads, you had manias, and the manias, they did bring in the capital that was needed for a long-term infrastructure that would serve everyone. But yeah, 10,000, I don't blink hearing that.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. Oh, I mean, that tells the story. Yeah. I don't think it's outlandish at all. I, largely agree with like Draper's assessment, with your assessment, what you just said there. I'm certainly on board with that. So, I mean, you don't think Bitcoin's in any kind of trouble? I mean, what do you think? Let's put on kind of the 10-year cap. Like, where do you see, or the 10-year hat, I should say, where do you see, like Bitcoin still going to be here in 10 years? Like what you can go as far as you want, as far as that prediction. Do you think Bitcoin will be here in 100 years? What do you, I mean, go for
sure,
it. Go wild.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, I think it's interesting to ask the reverse question too. Like, well, where's the dollar going to be in 10 years? Because if you're going to talk about value, then it's like, well, $1 million. All right, well, what is $1 million going to be in 10 years? Yeah, of course Bitcoin can be $1 million, but what can you buy with it? Is it going to be a house? Is it going to be a car? Is it going to be a bicycle?
Right.
So, but, and of course, the as I said, communicating vessels, the more disarray and volatility and inflation we have in the traditional financial system, the more money is going to flow into these currencies. And it doesn't matter which ones, but I do think that Bitcoin is going to have, I'm a maximalist in that sense, Bitcoin is going to have a market cap that is 80, 90, somewhere between 70 and 95% of the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem.
Sure.
Unless we have something like a corporate, like an Amazon coin or something that's like really, that has value, even though it's not entirely private. That is like kind of like a commercial, but even that, it's hard for me to imagine that would then be more than 30% of whatever Bitcoin is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like as I talking to the core devs and just seeing what they're doing and looking at also like just the aversion to go the hard fork route, for example, is telling me that yes, they really have a long-term vision and they're very aware that they are in a way fellow guardians of $10 billion and potentially 100 or $1 trillion worth of protocol.
Sure.
It's very precious, and you don't just... Bitcoin would have a fantastic future even if there were no protocol changes at this point, from this point onwards. With or without SegWit, which, who knows, it's a technical thing, but segregated witness is going to make possible a lot of things, but I think even without it, you could call it the best digital gold in the world.
Sure.
So and as long as that's status is intact, I see an amazing future for Bitcoin. Just value, not even like all these things of Visa-like transaction speed. We don't need any of that. We can just build exchanges and have them be centralized, and then do some final settlements on the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm totally fine with that. Everything else to me is bonus, which is probably why I'm pretty dispassionate looking at the whole, even the block size debate, or that Bitcoin is not having enough transactions. I'm just amazed at the Lightning Network and what's happening with sidechains. I had not imagined that back in 2011.
Right. Yeah, those kind of add-ons, or like these remoras to the shark of Bitcoin. I couldn't imagine those either. But they're amazing developments. As they come out. I think it's very interesting to watch. Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. Like recently, there is. Do you know what IPFS is? Have you heard about this?
No.
Okay, so this is the IPFS stands for the Interplanetary File System. And the idea is really creating like this full-on decentralized internet, okay, or decentralized cloud may be the better term to use, because cloud's a little more specific, as much as I hate that term. But they were going to build IPFS and have Bitcoin kind of, or the Bitcoin blockchain kind of be the back end for it, to some degree. So I mean, kind of a sidechain idea, kind of. And recently, they made a very controversial decision to go and work with Ethereum instead, and that they're going to build IPFS on top of Ethereum. I mean,
is this related to Storj, or is it a similar?
It's
project?
similar, yeah, okay. Very similar to Storj, yeah, and. Now, the reason that they gave, that the developers for IPFS said that they were going with Ethereum, was because they liked the development culture better at Ethereum. Now, I hear that, and I'm like, that's insane. Like, you don't have, no offense to Ethereum developers. I mean, I'll offend them if I want, but, no offense to them. But, like, the developers for Bitcoin, I mean, there's so much money flowing in Bitcoin right now as far as development goes. Like, it's just... just by the reasonability and logic of it, you're going to have some of the best developers in the world working with Bitcoin, not with Ethereum. And I think what happened is kind of a response to what you were just talking about, to where, how much debate there is over any changes whatsoever that could be made to, to Bitcoin Core and whatever. It's slow. It takes time. There's a lot of arguments and all that, but I consider that a good thing. And I think what IPFS found out was like, oh, we can't make the changes we want here because it's going to be, a slugfest every time we want to do something with Bitcoin. We're going to go with Ethereum where we can, do whatever the hell we want and all that stuff. Now, I understand the appeal of not wanting to have to get into some kind of, big argument to make any changes to Bitcoin. But at the same time, I like that because I look at the other, I look at the history of technology, particularly with like, say, operating systems, and I look at, when you just want to add like a wallpaper or a screensaver to something like Debian Linux. I mean, you talk about a slugfest. I mean, it's a verbal slugfest. I mean, you're throwing bricks at each other,
right.
when you're trying to just a wallpaper.
But can't you make applications?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
right.
Isn't the analogy then like, well, maybe these guys didn't feel like building their own sidechain?
Yeah, maybe that's the deal. But I like the fact, to continue with the analogy,
sure,
I like the fact that something as simple as a wallpaper is a huge argument because we're talking about security here.
Yep.
We're talking about everybody. I mean, in the world, whether people realize it or not, the world runs on Linux. I mean, the most used operating system is Windows, but as far as like what's the back end of everything, it's Linux, folks. Deal with it. And so I like that there's arguments over what gets included, and there's not just one person that gets to call the shots. So I'm actually really disappointed that IPFS went with Ethereum because it's like, well, I don't like your attitude here. I don't like the fact that you don't appreciate just how serious it should be taken, any changes being done to Bitcoin. It's not something that you should run away from. It's something you should embrace, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, why don't we shift, while we brought up Ethereum, if you want to shift from that, I mean, we can get into this, because I think a lot of people see, as far as, I mean, and I was impressed earlier, you mentioned that, you're constantly looking out for something. It'll keep you up at night if something's going to overtake Bitcoin. So I'll ask first, do you think something can overtake Bitcoin? That's a huge question.
I think theoretically.
Okay.
Theoretically, that's possible. I definitely don't want to be dogmatic. There's always possibility for improvement. But then at the same time, right now, looking at everything that I see, realistically, I don't see it. And the way I look at protocols, or especially protocols that are going to be core protocols on top of which stuff is built, it's kind of like a piece of land where it has the potential for stuff to be developed on it, but it needs certain properties, to acquire capital and people. Like one example I like to use is the city of Paris. If you look back, yeah, there's like a little island on the Seine River, and back in the day, it was easily defensible and made sense to have a settlement there. And then it was also good for trade because ships could pass there. And then, it was attractive because there were already a lot of people, and it was kind of central and easily accessible, not big mountain ranges very close and stuff like that. So, and so what you get is more and more layers are developed on top of Paris. Right now, you would go to see the Mona Lisa. That's like a very high level protocol in a way. It's or an application, I guess. And so with Bitcoin, you can argue about maybe things should have been a little bit different. Maybe the block size should have been 1.25 megabyte, or maybe the block time shouldn't have been 10 minutes. It should have been a bit whatever. You can argue all of that. But you can't argue that more and more stuff is being built on top of Bitcoin. And so as a stack, Bitcoin is growing more and more powerful. And the argument against not using it is very practical. It's like, well, okay, what stack am I going to use instead? It's not like some imaginary stack. You have to make real life choices. Yeah. And I think that answer is going to just repeatedly be Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. Increasingly so, because right now the selling point for Ethereum, for example, is smart contracts. Well, I think if you're intellectually honest, you have to admit that, yes, you can build those on Bitcoin too. It's just going to take some more time, and we need some more development, but they will come.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I agree with all that. So before, I mean, is there anything I guess here I'll append a question here. What's the one thing And I think we might have we've talked about this before off air, I think. So I'm curious to hear if you have any more answer to it, but go ahead and answer with what you had before. But like, what's the one feature that you think could, that say a new cryptocurrency could have that would, allow it to overtake Bitcoin? Like, what do you think, what would it take for something to somehow beat quote unquote Bitcoin?
To me, it would have to be, it would have to be a better gold. It would have to be more secure.
More secure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
More secure than Bitcoin. And like, maybe you could argue, well, part of the security is how fungible things are, and so you could argue that in Bitcoin things aren't very fungible right now. You can be blacklisted if you have an account with Coinbase, for example, and you send some money from Coinbase to a gambling website, they're gonna kick you out.
Yeah.
So in that sense, coins are not fungible, even though that is coming. But if Bitcoin were to like staunchly refuse to like do anything about that, and we would never have any sidechains development in terms of like helping people kind of anonymize their coins, I think that would be a problem, and then we could see a replacement somewhere.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my answer had generally been it'd have to be something that was somehow more anonymous. Like it'd have to allow for more anonymity. I think, coins that have more anonymity are, A, here, B, more interestingly, on their way very soon. Aforementioned Zcash. There's Monero, which we might get into later on. A thought came to me as you were describing a lot of this. I mean, people bring up Coinbase a lot. Like that's some people see it as maybe a central point of failure with Bitcoin because it is one of the back ends that I think a lot of people use that make, Bitcoin viable because it allows you to turn it into US dollars, right? I'm curious what you have to say to this, but, I kind of think, Coinbase, well, I don't like the fact that it's dealing with banks and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I can get into that. That's another subject. But I don't mind that something like Coinbase exists. My problem is that really it's the only game in town. Like, it's the only one that does what it does. I see that as sort of a huge issue. I mean, do you see in the future with Bitcoin or is something a Coinbase-esque kind of company? Like, is that something you think should continue to exist, should still be out there? I mean, what do you think about that?
The way I've heard Coinbase described is something like the VC's piggy bank. Like, so they invest in Coinbase, and what they get is access. It's an on-ramp from Bitcoin into the financial system. And so if you have portfolio companies who want to do things that involve both Bitcoin and fiat currency, you kind of want that connection with Coinbase, who's like well connected with lobbyists, and
it's a bridge.
A bridge. And so, in a sense, you could argue that it's bound to be, or it could become, one of those monopolistic companies. Like
sure.
Back in the day, if you wanted to, there was one phone company or one this or one that because they got the licenses to do so, and the other ones are boycotted. So I think that's a possibility. I think Circle is doing a pretty good job competing. Hearing a lot of good things about Circle. So in that sense, also when people talk about, could they go bankrupt? Like, do they actually have the Ethereum Classic that they were supposed to have? Because there's now delays in paying it out and stuff.
Right.
People are assuming that there will, at least from what I hear, kind of like just my own circle of friends, they think that there's going to be a bailout for Coinbase because it's an important piece of the puzzle from a VC point of view. Like, you kind of need that bridge.
Right. Bitcoin could survive without it, but in a lot of people's popular perception, it's too big to fail.
Well, a lot of people, especially from a VC point of view, because all these portfolio companies need it. So I don't know. I don't think, I think eventually governments are going to, this is kind of the big thing. Eventually governments are just going to accept Bitcoin as tax payments directly. You'll have a deposit address and you'll send your Bitcoins because there will be a huge loss involved in, imagine 30, 40, 50% inflation a year. People make their money, maybe a substantial portion of the population, maybe 10, 20% makes their actual money in Bitcoin. They have to then convert it to fiat, then pay the tax, the IRS, and then the IRS is going to somehow immediately spend it or just buy Bitcoin to pay stuff. Like, if you just look at what happened in Russia and stuff, it's a huge mess. If you have inflation and you have a big empire, there's I've seen studies that estimated that the losses were up to 80, 90%. So the moment what you should theoretically make in tax money, what ended up arriving in Moscow was only 20% of that. There were people would pay in kind.
Yeah.
Like taxes were paid, like literally, like with buckets of paint, and like, I'm a construction company. Let me build you a metro system. That's like literally how they would pay their taxes.
Yeah.
So imagine Bitcoin in a scenario like that. It's great. As a government, you just start accepting Bitcoin as taxes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that sort of thing is on its way. If not, I even feel like I've sort of started hearing some news that maybe in certain European countries that it was like starting to get really considered. But I could be somewhat wrong about that news. But blockchains are a thing overall. Like there's a lot of talk about Microsoft working with Bank of America and some other other banks and everything, where they're looking to okay, how can we integrate blockchains into banking, the legacy banking system and all this, which I think is really, well, that's not I want the legacy banking system to just go away. That's not a direction I want things to go in. But you're making the case why this would be so attractive, to a lot of these people.
They'll go bankrupt more efficiently. Yeah. They'll be able to track everything.
There we go. That's it. So before we get into kind of our next subject, we are talking with Tur Demeester. And am I pronouncing your last name right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. All right, cool. I don't know if it's because I spend any time in Europe or what. But before we get into the next subject, I'll lead into the next subject with, I'm going to CryptoCompare.com. Of course, they are a sponsor of Sovryn Tech and love having them on board. And I want to look at, let's see, Bitcoin's at 610 right now, and this is I should be honest, like, I'm recording this episode a little bit early, so we're in the beginning of October here, 2016. So Bitcoin's at $610 USD, of course, and Ethereum is presently at $13.24, and that is not classic. That is just good old-fashioned Ethereum. So Ethereum, I want to go down this road because we're talking about something, that could perhaps overtake. I thought it was an interesting point. I'd love to go into the side tangent, but I don't think I will right now, about like what if Amazon created, their own cryptocurrency and all this. I think that's an interesting point to bring up, that there could be something that could supersede Bitcoin to some degree. I think Amazon is an interesting concept to consider and all that. But Ethereum is what a lot of people are banking on. Now, obviously, looking at this, and Ethereum isn't as old as Bitcoin, of course.
$1 billion market cap.
Right.
Still.
There you go. Yeah. It's serious on paper, it really looks like something. even though granted, as far as like values that the average person would look at, they'd say, well, of course, I'm going to go with Bitcoin. It's worth $610, as compared to 13. But Ethereum, I am notorious for being quite the critic of Ethereum.
Shoo.
Yeah. And I guess, I want to get into this because I want to start talking altcoins and all this and how they compare to Bitcoin and whatever. But I'm curious, my listeners get to hear my take on Ethereum often enough. They don't get to hear anybody else's. What do you, 40-foot view, what do you think of Ethereum, Tur?
I think Ethereum is, in one word, it would be utopian, I'm afraid to say.
Utopian?
Yes, I think there's some ambitions that are, I think, impossible to achieve. And so, like, the main point, I have an article coming out, and the title is, maybe tellingly, why I'm short Ethereum and long Bitcoin, which is the case. I have a short position against Ethereum expressed in Bitcoin. I do think in fiat, who knows, maybe in dollars it can still go up, but I don't think it will win the race against Bitcoin. Okay,
where would people be able to find this article when it comes out?
It'll be on Medium, so I'll definitely post about it on Twitter, and there might be, maybe Bitcoin Magazine or some other publication might pick it up and republish, but
Excellent.
I don't know yet.
Okay, sure, go for it.
So the first part is coming out in the coming week. Yeah, and so like the main point I make is that if you look at any computer network, any network that has just, imagine computers connected to each other, you are going to have a trade-off between security, cost, flexibility, and there's one more thing, I think speed. So it's basically when you're talking about moving packets of data around. And supposedly some of that data is, is important. It shouldn't leak. So security really is an issue. And what we see in Bitcoin is that the priority, right, number one is security. That is being prioritized. And so the trade-off is that you'll get some lower speeds. It won't be as flexible. It might be more expensive. You have to pay, maybe 10 cents for a transaction. That's the trade-off. Whereas Ethereum, what they prioritize is flexibility. They want to be an open platform. They have implementations in the 3 official implementations, officially endorsed by the Ethereum Foundation, with different code bases. In different programming languages. And then there's even 6 independent implementations. So in a way, it's like a browser, like ways to browse and interact with the network. And then they have smart contract programming languages. They also have multiple of those, which I think there's the most popular is called Solidity. It's JavaScript based, I think. And then they have a bunch of other ones. And these are just a few examples of how Ethereum is trying to be flexible. And so what I argue is that it's a huge mortgage on the security of the network. Because what if you publish a contract in one language, and then somebody in a totally different browser with it, reads it and misinterprets it? Because these browsers are automatically interacting. They're going to process transactions. And so what we've seen already is people publish contracts that are deliberately meant to fuck with the network.
Right.
And they crash the nodes. And that's another way in which Ethereum is trying to be flexible. It is accepting any data, anything. You can publish anything. And so obviously it's kind of like if your browser is going to pull in any string of code, then it'll pull in viruses too.
Yeah, this is a great point. And I'm not the first person to say this, but I love the phrase that, we need to stop calling it Turing complete. We need to call it Turing vulnerable. Meaning that, this I've been saying for some years, is that, Bitcoin wasn't Turing complete on purpose because it's a security feature. Right. It's not a bug, it's a feature. You wanted to limit it that way. Exactly what you're describing wouldn't happen.
Yeah, you want it to be dumb. There's only I think about 60 upcodes or something. So 60 very specific commands that you can give the Bitcoin browser, and it'll do those things to the T, and you can rely on it. And it'll do nothing. And they've even deactivated some because they feared some might introduce some vulnerabilities. Whereas compare 60 to infinity. That's Ethereum.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. And so I think that's a very valid point to bring up. About Ethereum itself. And this is why you're going short, meaning you're expecting it, to fail. Yeah. And that's, how about Classic? Do you feel the same way?
Because all those concerns just apply to Classic too. The only difference is Classic takes the flexibility philosophy just a little bit less far, in the sense that it does not think that hard forks should be accepted, and I guess no, it doesn't want to reverse transactions. That's kind of the thing. It doesn't want to annul the execution of certain contracts just because some people are losing money, which is something that the Ethereum Foundation is willing to do. It appears. But other than that, it has all the same vulnerabilities and problems.
Yeah, agreed.
Ethereum Classic literally is the Ethereum protocol before the hard fork. It's
right.
It really is that.
Yeah, so it falls prey to all the same problems that people that have been that have had a negative view of Ethereum. They're all still there. It's all still a part of the program. Yeah, I agree. And that's concerning. That brings up one of the big issues for me. And if you have thoughts on this, I'm interested to hear them. Is that this is it's rewriting history like that. What normal Ethereum ETH is now, it is rewriting history that ETC is saying is still a part of their history, which is, the DAO hack, quote unquote, which really, it wasn't even theft at all. It was just using the system as it was allowed to be used.
And as it was under the same banner of code is law. That's what they said.
Yeah, exactly. Which, oh boy, that phrase alone, you could go forever about that. But this is my concern: is that I know a lot of people use this phrase. You don't have to agree with it, but a lot of people call Ethereum the Church of Vitalik, that really it's one guy. And I kind of feel like that's concerning too. Is that without Vitalik, Ethereum, I think to a lot of people is meaningless. Like they are relying upon this person's existence,
right?
To do something. And, unless they're going to create some kind of story, that there's like that he if something ever happened to Vitalik, not that I ever want to, I think he's actually largely kind of a nicer guy. But that if something happened to him, that he'd come back to life in 3 days, somehow in the Ethereum blockchain or something like Jesus Christ, I don't know. But, but I mean, it's just without that's the problem. And like Apple's kind of a real world example, I think, to where without Steve Jobs, that is not the same company. Right. And you can prove it that it's not the same thing. And in fact, I dare say it's almost a consumer malicious company, in my opinion. And as to where at one point I was, very serious Apple fanboy. But yeah, so I worry about that too, is that you have a figurehead when it comes to this, and Bitcoin doesn't have that problem. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I agree. Especially, that's the thing. Like, you want to be flexible, but then it's like, which direction are we going in? For like Peter Todd has brought this up. Like, what are the specs? What is the spec of Ethereum? Can you tell me? Like, what is the recipe that these different implementations are supposed to follow? Because they can just go each in their own way. So there's a person that is going to unify. Mm-hmm. Okay? If there is a problem, somebody's going to call the shot, and that is very likely going to be Vitalik. And so in that sense, yeah, I agree that the Church of Vitalik, or whatever you want to call it, even without all the pejorative, because there's, I guess, pretty funny cartoons out there of Vitalik as the Pope and stuff like that. But so and I think even in the fairly short term, there are concerns from a legal perspective, because if you're going to do hard forks, if you're going to endorse a hard fork, people can sue you because they can claim, and possibly, who knows what the judge is going to say. I'm not talking morally, just legally, they can claim that you have the power somehow to claw back funds and give them to other people, as would happen with the DAO.
Right.
And so Vitalik, for example, he, just as an example, he posted on Twitter that he owned some DAO tokens after the hack, that he bought more DAO tokens after the hack. Mm-hmm. He already was, I think, a curator for the DAO, which, could imply him as being involved in the project. And then he, after only 5.6% of all the Ether owners voted, he declared that there was a community consensus, and then he also facilitated the actual hard fork.
Right.
Which was a massive wealth transfer from the Ethereum Classic, the old chain, to this new chain. So there could be legal trouble. And this is just one example. Like, hard forks bring about this enormous spider web of legal issues that the core developers of Ethereum could very well be, somehow mired in and get into trouble, and then like, who's going to call the shots? Like, I really don't wish it upon them, but imagine the kind of trouble that even if you're brilliant, if you're running Ethereum and then at the same time you have to run like an army of lawyers to help you defend, and then the currency value is sinking as well. Like, we haven't seen, Ethereum has never dropped in value in a way. Like, I mean, from there it briefly peaked to like $1.5 million market cap, but it's been pretty stable at $1 billion market cap. So my question is, what is going to happen to all the unity and enthusiasm and positive atmosphere once the market cap drops, significantly below that 1 billion point?
Yeah, I mean, and, I hear it all the time from people where they will say that, like, if there's a problem in Ethereum, like there's the recent DDoS attack, there's been other things, what the answer that I always hear is Vitalik will solve it. And it's like, are you kidding?
Right.
Like, what is that? I mean, and this kind of speaks to a more abstract issue. And one of the things I love about Bitcoin, and I think it can be true for other coins as well, and that's fine, is that, the legacy system in general, governments, all of this, I want technologies that just end run everything. You don't interact with governments, you don't interact with the banks, you don't do any of that. You just end run the whole goddamn thing. And I think that's wonderful. But what makes that more difficult is if the government knows who to point a gun at. And that's a real problem when these people have faces. I mean, and yeah, you could say, well, they could point guns at, at the Bitcoin core team or something, right? But there's already other teams making alternative clients for Bitcoin that, I mean, you can't catch them all, as to where...
Plus it's super secure. Like, you don't need emergency fixes.
Right.
Bitcoin, if all the core devs were in jail right now, Bitcoin will be fine.
Right. As to where, like, Vitalik was fixing an issue, what, it was like 2 hours before he was going to go on stage in Shanghai.
It was literally that. They had to postpone DEF CON 2 with half an hour because all the and of course then they came on stage and like a wild roar like from the audience, like they did it. But like, really, do you want to be dependent on like a bunch of what? I don't want to say teenagers, but they're in their 20s, right?
Yeah, right.
They're kids.
No, exactly. I
don't mean this condescendingly, but I mean, they you know, they might get all of a sudden have a different passion and pursue something else.
Yeah, no, right. I think a lot of people saw it as like positive PR.
Right.
No, I see it as negative PR that whole stunt happened.
Right.
I mean, that's if that was even, you know, some people even, you know, want to say that, oh, it was all set up and all that stuff. Well, it's a bad setup. Don't do that. That does not instill confidence, you know, in me at all over the whole thing.
And there's a fine line between hype and resentment, I think. Like, you know, people who are very hyped and psyched about things, when all of a sudden something changes, that can turn into resentment. And like, we've seen it in Bitcoin. I'm sure it'll happen in Ethereum too. And it's very like, even looking at, for example, I remember I was pretty emotionally involved in the whole Ron Paul campaign. It was probably because I knew him back when he was like a nobody, not personally, but in the sense like I would read his articles and I would know he was like around the Mises Institute. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, even after this like little announcement in his like living room, like, oh, I'm launching for president, like it was just this nothing. He turned into a big thing.
Right.
So I was pretty emotionally involved. And what you saw was that there was this explosion of meetup groups all around the country, like all these flags, like everywhere. Well, I see something similar with Ethereum, and that doesn't mean that, oh, this is the proof that something's wrong. No, I'm just saying don't use those little flags on a map to say that Ethereum is still going to be around in 10 years. That's not an argument.
Yeah. So, I mean...
Because the Ron Paul meetup groups are no longer around.
No, right, exactly. No, you're right. That's a great point.
Right.
And so I guess I wonder, you know, I asked you about, you know, where would Bitcoin be in 10 years, 100 years, whatever. I mean, like how long, what, do you have a timetable that you're willing to guess? And like I said, nobody will hold it against you. Sure. Do you have a timetable you're willing to guess on how long Ethereum will be around? I mean, any thoughts? I mean, I'd argue
it's hard because, like, as you know, Keynes is like markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So,
right.
So that's also why, like, the article that I'm putting out, like, if you're gonna like join me in like short Ethereum, keep in mind professional traders don't trade with more than 1% of their capital. Usually, 2% is like a maximum. Like really, and also in Bitcoin you have all this exchange risk, and because you can't hold Ethereum short position in cold storage. You know, so like be really careful. And even if I'm right, even if I'm right that if Ethereum eventually will like perish, there might be a second wave to this hype because Santander is now getting involved somehow, and there's Microsoft. But all that aside, I think it's kind of like with all things that are movements. I don't expect them to like die entirely because some people are just so involved. They just kind of like they keep being involved somehow, but a market cap of like around $100 million, I see that happen maybe, and I think that's definitely possible in like 2 years, 3 years.
Wow. Okay.
I think that's really possible. Like if it's clear that, you know, it's not a panacea, and there's like more hacks. There's like attacks happening now. Like every few days, there's new attacks happening on the Ethereum network, and they were coordinated. And I like for the record, I have nothing to do with that.
Nor
I wouldn't even know how, but
yeah,
like it's, you know, and it's really important to keep in mind that market psychology works both ways. Like it works on the way up, but it does something like price gravity. It really is a thing. Like price goes up, but then once price starts declining, the psychology of people really changes, and they all of a sudden see everything in a different light and get somber. And even with Bitcoin, we saw, despite amazing news coming out, the price was going down, and the sentiment was just horrible for the longest time.
Right.
So I really think that could totally happen with Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my own thought is really at any time. Like, I mean, you know, all it takes is one really, really wrong move.
Right.
And I mean, and there's already been a couple, and I you know, it's dominoes, you know, I think, and so it's just a matter of time. And you know, it could be my opinion, any day. But yeah, I appreciate, your perspective on that. I'm with you. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's so much that could be said about Ethereum. I mean, again, is it a model that anybody wanted? Is a lot of what it's trying to do, is it any better than, using big iron, than using, servers and all of this? Like, I mean, there's speed concerns. Like, that was one of your criteria. In the article you mentioned about speed, is it really going to do a better job than some other things? Right. Sure.
There's a lot of, even a lot of political analogies you can make, in the sense of in a way, politics is just it's it's utopianism. So there's all kinds of varieties, and so you can think of some political philosophies that really apply to Ethereum, just making something out of nothing, or the belief in abundance. Just believe in abundance, and it's just going to appear. Yeah. But the difference is, in politics, there's an army behind that, whereas in cryptocurrency, it's just competition. People can just sell their coin and move on and buy something else.
Yeah.
One coin is maybe who knows, maybe North Korean style populism, and then Ethereum is more like the welfare state of Sweden or something. But you're not stuck in Sweden, or you're not stuck in Korea.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, Ethereum isn't being backed by drones yet. I might have said something wrong there.
I heard a noise.
Yeah. So, if anyone's wondering, we do have what is often called in the radio or podcasting world a peanut gallery here. The lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy is listening in, and she's waving to everybody here. So, of course, I'm being joined by Tur de Meester. Oh.
Hi.
There she is. You beauty. Love you. So,
me too.
Yeah. So we're looking, I'll admit, Tur and I are looking over at one of the, three original hosts, one of the unholy trinity of Let's Talk Bitcoin, to make sure everything we say is on the up and up. And no, that's not happening.
I love what I'm hearing so far. Especially when you guys were saying, I don't know if you want to get into this in particular, but especially when you're saying we're trusting these 20-year-olds to do this advanced coding and make this project that has millions of dollars invested in it. What about the social engineering aspect of it? Trusting a 20-year-old who kind of, by some of the things he's written, has some aspirations to code people into good behavior and control society, and some of the early rhetoric, especially from Ethereum, was very disturbing to me, because it was all first of all, it was written in this esoteric style of okay, they've been reading Pythagoras and
Philosopher
Plato
Kings and all this.
The Philosopher Kings and references Plato. To the sacred geometry and stuff, and and Freemasonry, and I know it sounds crazy when I'm saying, oh my God, Ethereum are writing Freemasonry shit, but but I think there's something to it, because I've heard Vitalik say stuff why can't we just code people into good behavior? He doesn't trust people to be, I don't know, to function in a society without the help of rules that are written by a computer that has no logic and that is all logic and has no emotion, and therefore has no bias, but also has no compassion and has no flexibility and has no understanding. So,
wow.
If you guys want to talk about that, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts, because I know you guys can have a great discussion about that.
Well, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy throws in a stick of dynamite into the conversation. That's something. I mean, Tur, do you have any thoughts on what she said, or I could start taking in on it?
Well, yeah, it's it reminds me of the whole debate about artificial intelligence and the fear that people have, what if they take over, and we need to we need to manage the artificial intelligence bots and build in all kinds of fail safes, and so it's yes, a lot of people you cannot trust, but that you don't solve that by then doing mass interventionism or mass surveillance, or
right.
I think that's just a dead end, even if you accept the premise a lot of people can't be trusted, and so I think intelligent networks are going to be bypassed by the market.
Yeah, fair enough. In fact, I can think of, there's a guy, Gary LaChance, I think his name is. He wrote an entire book or paper on the idea that, with Ethereum and some of this other stuff, more Turing complete, blockchains or whatever, that you could create this ultra surveillance state. and that would allow for actual human freedom. That was his case. I disagree, completely.
Right.
But, I mean, ID systems and all this other stuff, is something that is getting talked about heavily, getting baked into Ethereum and all that, all of which actually ID would be a great conversation to have with you. You've forwarded me to some very interesting people, Christopher Allen, I'm thinking of, who has some great things to say on the whole subject. Some of it's kind of inconclusive, but I think that's good because, I don't want to hear just one person that has all the answers. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what Stephanie's talking about, I think there's some serious concerns there. I mean, I'm reminded of, and I bring up this case often, but it's so rare we get such a high-profile individual speaking with some degree of clarity and humbleness, and that would be Sergey Brin of Google. When he was talking about, he was asked about Google Plus, and he said, "I had no business making Google Plus." He said, "I'm terrible at being social with people. Why the hell would I make a social network?"
Right.
And it's like, yes, thank you for admitting that. And so it becomes a concern when you're talking about something that is so broad in scope, which you were describing to her, what's the direction with Ethereum? Well, I mean, my understanding of what I have heard, and I've been at events, and you've been to plenty of events as well, Tur. I mean, you speak at many of them, what I've heard from a lot of people at Ethereum is that this is meant to touch every aspect of human interaction.
Yeah. And then it's like, okay, then it's like total freedom. All right. Freedom for whom exactly?
Right.
Like in the Panopticon prison, who has total freedom? Maybe the guard who's like right in the middle? That's awesome for him.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that is just the most solid point. I love that. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about people that, and I mean no offense. I'm just saying that I question their understanding of actual human interaction and of the human condition.
Right.
And you hear this from other people. There's lots of authors, lots of bloggers and all this stuff, in the blockchain space who are kind of talking about, no, we need to be thinking more like computers. We need to be, a lot of things need to go kind of in this direction, all watched over by machines of loving grace, right? That's the old poem. That's scary as hell.
Yeah. Like, to like, oops, I mistook, freedom for control. Like, right. You thought I was talking about freedom. Like, oops, I was actually talking about control.
Yeah.
I kind of like control.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's the thing, is that the human condition doesn't come down to ones and zeros as to where that's the way that they're thinking. That's the way these systems are. They are literally ones and zeros. Like, you can't have it any other way.
Right. And then, so this reminds me of interventionism too, is that, I think, I don't remember which book, one of the books that I read about interventionism is just describing this eternal dynamic in an interventionist governed system where I can't even think of it, but it's like let's introduce a minimum wage, and then there's all kinds of problems because of that. Well, we'll fix that by doing this other thing, and then we'll create subsidies and give people jobs that are subsidized. And oops, now businesses aren't doing that well. Well, we'll just print more money. It's like this eternal it just keeps on proliferating, and I think, who knows, but I think that there's some of that in Ethereum where it's like we made this choice that didn't make a lot of sense, but we liked it because it gave us more control, and now there's this side effect. Well, we'll just add a little more control here and a little switch there, and it just keeps going, and eventually I think that's just gonna run into a wall.
Yeah, I agree.
Which in a government, in a state, it lasts 100 years, whereas in cryptocurrency it might be 4 years.
Yeah, right. Good. Yeah, good point. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like for the actual user, for the person, for humans to have control, their technology needs to be kind of dumb. Right. That's the technology needs to be, you need to have dumb pipes. You need, that's what allows actual choice.
Right.
Creating this entire platform, this entire network, like Ethereum or whatever, I think it's a false sense of control.
Right. It's like I just imagine myself as this kind of disgruntled cryptocurrency, whatever. I just want to do things. I don't really care. It's give me access to the truth. That's what I want. Blockchain. Right. That's all I need. Just I don't want you to tell me what to do.
Right.
Give me access to the truth.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's what a blockchain is. It just tells you what happened and who did what.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think a lot
not even who did what, just what happened financially.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's dumb. It's largely dumb. I mean, as an analogy, not that analogy is always, not that proof by analogy is always proof, but as an analogy, like I'm thinking of the internet, because I think a lot of people want to compare. Well, I mean, there was a while where Bitcoin was getting compared to the internet. I don't know that that's necessarily fair, but whatever. But a lot of people definitely say, well, Ethereum is the new internet and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but with the internet, and some people will say, well, there's people that ultimately control the internet. No, that's not true. I think there's people that ultimately may control the World Wide Web, but that is one aspect of the internet. The internet is so many more things. It's email, it's IRC, it's Usenet, it's all these different technologies. The World Wide Web is just one aspect of that. And for example, in a lot of cities, you have what's called dark fiber. Okay, which is internet infrastructure that's not being used by the internet at all. But people, groups, and I'm not going to name names, but there are groups that will take advantage of this dark fiber and use it for their own, their own goals and whatever they want to do. But that's the beauty of it, is that they're dumb pipes. And so whatever you end up plugging into it, you can take advantage of, and you can use. That's genuine choice. But where it's something that ultimately relies upon, say, some core developers or something, or one guy, perhaps, that's really not choice. It's a false sense. So,
well, and that's what I see in Ethereum, for example, and I need to dig into this more, but, one way... one traditional criticism of Ethereum was, well, you can launch any contract. That means I can create a loop. I can just create a contract that's just going to, drain the resources of your processors because it's going to just go on forever.
Right.
And it's going to drain. And then it's like, well, the solution is we're going to charge, it's going to be gas. We're going to classify transactions or operations in different classes and give them a price. And then the contract will automatically pay that price. But in a way, that's policy, right? Because you're defining the price of this contract, and then it has to be tweaked because the attacker found. And so that may work, but I think it's risky. And I think it is, kind of like what Paul Stortz says, is that, altcoins are like test nets that just run amok. Everything you can do in altcoins, you can do on a test net. And
right.
Just, reset it every now and then, that people don't start assigning monetary value to it.
Sure.
And that's what I heard as well when I talked. It was actually Thomas Bloomer who gave me that analogy. Thomas Bloomer was Bits of Proof, which was an alternative Bitcoin implementation, and then now works for Digital Asset Holdings.
Okay.
So he's actually, I think, the main architect. He said that early on when I asked him about Ethereum, he's like, to me, it's like NASA, he said. It's like, it's interesting, but would I invest in it? Like, I don't know. It's like an interesting research project. And maybe that's what it should have been. Maybe it should have been just a test net, just, playing around and no harm done. But now all of a sudden, it's like a $1 billion bubble.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's not a plane that they're repairing while it's in the sky. To me, it's like a space shuttle, and they haven't even figured out how to land the crew back to Earth.
Right.
It's like, well, we'll send more shuttles and give them parachutes later on.
Yeah, just keep throwing, BS solutions at it. Yeah, all great points. I think we can. How do you feel about that, Stephanie? We're getting the nod of approval here. All right, we're getting the thumbs up. That's what matters. So, no. Of course. But anyway,
I have some beef with you over Bitcoin talk.
Oh,
I was never invited.
Oh no!
You better bring that up.
Okay.
With Adam.
All right, we're getting stuff hammered out right here on the show. But anyway, so I think we can start to steer a bit away from Ethereum. I've got other subjects I want to get to. In case you hadn't noticed, listeners, this show is running with no breaks because I have a guest, and there's just so much that I think we want to cover and get into, and I think there's so much, not to overuse the word, but I think there's so much gold in this conversation that I'm really glad you're here, Tur, and I think people are going to get really something out of this. But I'm going to take a break here quick, and just, speaking of gold, I want to tell you about something. I mean, I think Ethereum's bullshit, just straight up, and I want to tell you about something that isn't bullshit, something that has a great track record, something that is, we mentioned cold storage, something that I call analog cold storage, okay? And that is real gold, silver, platinum, palladium, precious metals, okay? These things still matter. I've got the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy right over my shoulder.
I like it too.
You like gold? Yes, you do. You're so
yes.
Yeah. She has her cute voice on. Use your inside voice. So, but if you want to get your hands on some, gold, silver, platinum, palladium, all of your precious metals, I want you to go to Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. They are absolutely, I say this every week, but they are one of the best businesses in the world today. Okay, Roberts and Roberts Brokerage is phenomenal. Stephanie, yes.
They're nice.
They are very nice. They're run by one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life, and that is Tim Fry. He is just phenomenal, full-on liberty lover. And let him know when you go to Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, go to gold.zog.ninja. Let them know that the Golden Stallion sent you, and they're going to know who you're talking about because Tim Fry listens to this show. He is the real deal. Okay, this is somebody, you want to deal with other ethical people, this is how you do it. And Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, also, this is the best, especially for this episode. They are a Bitcoin preferred business. Okay, they want to deal with you in Bitcoin because they know it's superior money in almost every way. So if you want to get your hands on that good old fashioned analog cold storage of your wealth, you want to get gold, silver, all that, use Bitcoin to buy it. Tim will love you for it. And you'll get it so fast. Believe me, you'll get it very, very fast on this show. So I cannot thank Roberts and Roberts Brokerage enough for being a longtime sponsor of Sovryn Tech. Means the world to me. Again, the website gold.zog.ninja. That'll take you there. Or you can go to rrbi.co if you find that to be an easier URL to remember. But go there, let them know the Golden Stallion sent you, and believe me, you are going to be one happy person when you get your hands on it. And use Bitcoin for fuck's sake, because that is great money. So
Isn't that really awesome, by the way, that there's like a lot of Bitcoiners that are now like discovering gold? Like they had never heard of it. And then it's like, man, it's like this thing, it's kind of like Bitcoin, and it's been around for like 1,000 years, and like I can like buy it too. Like, yeah, I love that. I'm a big fan of gold, by the way. Like, still, I think it's like this song is not over for gold. No, right? Yeah, I think there's always, in many ways, I think it's the offline solution for wealth. I mean, it is the ultimate offline solution for wealth: gold, silver, all that. And that's good to hear. Because again, you are somebody that is, you have a newsletter and all that, right? That you put out there with financial kind of, advice, reports, speculations, all this, right? So, I mean, certainly it's worth it to hear from you that, you think gold is still a player. I mean, I think we could take a moment to talk about absolutely. That. So that's like one of the major things I set out when I was like deciding on what am I going to do with economics. It's like, all right, well, investing, okay, that makes sense. And then like what makes sense in the investment, from the investment point of view? It's like, well, most everything is insolvent these days. Right. Most everything. Governments, a lot of companies are over leveraged, but mostly governments and on all levels. So what is the response to that? What happens in times when, there's a bond crash and stuff? Well, what you see is people revert to assets that don't have third-party risk, and also assets that are liquid, that you can buy and sell quite easily for quite a uniform price all around the world. And obviously gold, fits that bill. Bitcoin too, but I would say gold even more. You can, take gold to the Sahara and you'll be able to sell it probably. Yeah, absolutely. So that makes total sense, and I think there will be a wealth transfer when all this comes down, and the people that have liquid assets that are not, don't have third-party risk, they will win out, and they'll be able to buy the other assets at bargain prices. If you looked at, this is a bit dramatic example, but like the Weimar Republic in the 1920s, you could buy a house for a couple coins. Like literally, people would pay an apple's worth for the monthly rent. Yeah, that was how bad things were, and that's Germany, how bad things get when you have very high inflation. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's all solid points. I think it's a good thing to diversify. It was interesting. We just before the little interlude there, we were mentioning about. Like running things, like a lot of the things that altcoins do, a lot of the functions that altcoins do could be done on a test net. Do you see a purpose to altcoins? Like, I know there's a lot of people that are, Bitcoin only, and I understand their points. I actually, largely side with them more than I do with, a lot of people that want to just create the next scam coin of some kind, which is, in the altcoin space, that seems to be a lot more common, unfortunately. Right. But do you see a purpose to altcoins? Do you think that they have a validity into the future? I think it's kind of like asking, do you see a purpose for pink sheets, or do you see a purpose for like gambling markets and stuff? Like, yeah. you know, it's maybe it's a less big a function than a lot of people might want to see, but yeah, I do think there's a function. There's definitely no reason to like, you know, like physically interfere with people who want to launch altcoins and stuff. But like, you know, in the sense like, no, absolutely, and I think that, you know, there needs to be a variety of opinions that people can act on. Like anybody can launch their own coin. That's great. And like for a while, I held some Litecoin as a hedge against Bitcoin, if in case there was some kind of unforeseen problem,
something catastrophic.
Yeah, I would have some Litecoin. And this was based on my knowledge about gold and silver. Is that for example, there was a town near Russia. I think it was in Poland that had. So, you know, the gold-silver ratio has always traditionally been about 16-1.
Yes.
So, silver being 16 times less valuable than gold for an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened there is that all of a sudden that got out of whack, and gold was way more valuable. Like it was like 50 or 100 times more valuable than silver for a while. This is like in the early 19th century. What was the case is that the threat of the Red Army was there, and people were focused on having portable wealth. That's why they bought gold. That's why they wanted gold as savings and not silver. And so my thinking was similar. Well, if there's a big problem with Bitcoin, there's maybe even a government threat against Bitcoin. Well, then like this tiny little brother is maybe going to be ignored. So why not have some I don't feel that strongly about that anymore. I'm like a little bit more maybe diversified. I'm very, very heavy into Bitcoin right now. Mm-hmm. I do think there's going to be a big move up. And then when that happens, I'm going to diversify more. But that's kind of my thinking that, altcoins, there is a place for them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as an example of what you just described, I remember in China, or Litecoin did that rally, was about a year ago, and it was because of, you know, actions by the Chinese government.
I think it was actually late 2013.
Was it 2000? Nah, I was thinking of a later event.
Okay.
But maybe it was like 2014 or something like that.
They had another peak. That's true.
Yeah.
They actually made some money.
Yeah, well, there you go. Right?
Yeah.
But, you know, it was because it wasn't such a target, people ran to it. You know, ran to Litecoin in China, and so there was this pop in the price.
I never made that connection.
Yeah, and I mean that's I've talked about it. This was on Sovryn Tech some years ago. I can never remember the episode numbers for a lot of this stuff because when you're doing a show for 4 years, it's like how the hell do you remember all this? But anyway, I mean, so I think there's a use case in that. I think that there's a use case. I mean, I agree, like to some degree, I agree with that. You know, you could do a lot of this in testnet, but I think there's something when I feel like it's kind of like poker. When you're just playing with pennies, people act a lot differently than when there's real money involved. Very true. And so I think that if you want to test out a lot of these different features with altcoins, maybe before you integrate them into Bitcoin or something, but have it have actual value of some kind, you know, and value is subjective, of course. But I think that there's something to that. I've always liked the idea that they can be experiments. Right.
And it's just like, be aware that it's pink sheets. Like, you're buying penny stocks.
Yeah. Keep that in mind, though.
99% is going to fail.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the one thing that so many people seem to forget, you know, they forget about caveat emptor, you know, buyer beware. Right. And that goes true for anything, you know, I mean, and these things are, you know, to some degree digital commodities. They're more than that, but, you know, buyer beware when you get involved in any of this stuff. Something that's happened recently, you'll shift gears here a bit, is Monero had quite the rally. Yeah. Now I talked about this on one of my Patreon only episodes recently where I did I did more of a technical background or a breakdown of Monero and of Dash and all this because they're, you know, privacy centric currencies more so than say Bitcoin is. And so, you know, you can find that patreon.com/SovrynTech if you want to become a Sovryn Tech patron. I'd love to have you. You know, it's only at bare minimum $1 a month, but a lot of people are upping that donation amount, and I really appreciate that. But you can hear the episodes where I talk about Monero and all of this because there was quite a rally recently, and it was around the fact that Monero was you know, because it is this privacy-centric currency and that people see a need for that. You know, they wanted to buy stuff on the dark web, you know, on Tor and all that with it. And they were, you know, it's sort of that little brother to Bitcoin to where, okay, Bitcoin's a little too mainstream. We need something else that we need to use. But now Monero, while it had that nice rise, has popped again. I mean, I stopped looking at it because so originally it was Bytecoin. Then in April, I think, of 2014, it became, then they switched it over to Monero, and they went with, CryptoNote and all this stuff. And then, or CryptoNote 2, I think is what they implemented with it. And then in September 2014, there was the Merkle tree attack. And once that happened, I just stopped paying attention to it. I was like, okay, this is, no need for this to be on my radar. But again, like we were just describing, it came back for a bit, and people were very interested, started getting very invested in it. And now there was just in this past couple weeks, there has been a pop. The bubble of it has popped. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And you could give me, your overall thoughts on Monero if you want.
Sure, yeah. So I haven't studied it very closely. I do know some people who have been involved, and I have a pretty good impression of the Monero community. Like, I feel like they're pretty dedicated, and they have some chops. So there's that. Then there's like the pop, I guess the move up, which was started by two darknet markets who I was a bit suspicious about how closely those announcements were. I feel like there's been... My suspicion is that behind the scenes, they kind of coordinated, and some people bought some Monero, and then it was like coordinated to put out the news, like, oh, these darknet markets are... Because it's a big deal. Like, darknet markets are big. People often underestimate, I think, how much money is going around these days. Sure. And how fast it's growing, too.
Yeah, it was Alphabay, and I don't remember the other one, but yeah, anyway,
right.
Continue.
Yeah, and those are the big ones.
Yes.
So that was important. So I was a bit suspicious about that, but then again, they probably wouldn't implement support if there wasn't some demand for it. I do think the average darknet market customer... This is also what I hear from the Bitcoin Uncensored guys. They don't really care that much about privacy. It's more like the dealers who are worried, and they then have CoinJoin, and they have ways to to deal with that. So I own some Monero. I bought some more when the announcement came out, and then it went to like a market cap of like $300 million. And I wasn't so much looking at the price, but more at the momentum, just kind of like. And I saw the momentum slow down, and I decided to get out and just see what happened. And yeah, it did go down after that. So I'm glad I did. So that's kind of the way I look at these altcoin rallies, is that the momentum is very delicate. Like this, and you have to kind of look at the vibe that you get from the social media, and like, are people like kind of like really stoked, and they keep, and there's like, it's kind of like in a way like, it's like a crack high. Like, you need like additional doses for it to keep going higher, so you need all this news. And after the news of the darknet markets, there wasn't all that much happening with Monero. Right. So I think that's part of why it like slowed down again. And this doesn't mean that it doesn't have long-term legs. It just means that right now it's a lull, and I don't know. Like, it'll depend, because Zcash is coming out, and we have to see what's up with that. And then also there's some pretty interesting, I think, Mimblewimble and some other ways to anonymize bitcoins that are also are being built or being further developed. Sure. So there's some serious competition going on, and I think like if you want to do like a bet, I would say like, well, buy a little basket. Like kind of like think about like a little privacy coin basket and put some Monero, maybe some Zcash when it comes out. Yeah, some Dash maybe. Dash, I don't know about that. I'm actually pretty suspicious that it's not so much that I have a lot of direct knowledge, but for example, with Dash, there's a post on Steemit that just came out like 2 days ago, which I don't like Steemit either, but that's
right on.
Story.
All right.
But
I vowed a couple episodes I'm never going to talk about it again, but thank you. So keep going.
Scam.
Yeah, scam. Bravo. I love that cough. All right. We'll have to do something about that cough.
Yes. Yeah. It's just this lung infection that I've been dealing with a few days, but I didn't want to mention it,
Yeah. But Dash, there was the post.
Yeah. So this guy, and apparently he just seems to be like just some normal guy, and he had a proposal to make an improvement to Dash, and then he also saw some other people who had proposals, and they just didn't get any money. And so what he's arguing, and he seems to have been involved with Dash for like a year or so, is that even though he was really excited, now he's not anymore at all, because he feels like the process of allocating funds is like seriously flawed, and in the sense that there's like favoritism, like if you're friends with Evan, you get money, and if you're not, you don't. So that kind of worries me. And then there's like a bunch of people that I respect who have very low opinion of Dash, and so that worries me too. I don't want to like make big claims. This is just that's what I see so far.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I was skeptical of Dash when it was Darkcoin, I've talked about this on Sovryn Tech before, but when it was Darkcoin, they had like set goals on the website for, okay, this is where, we're trying to be GPU resistant, trying to be this, blah, 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 blah. And like they started, I mean, I give them credit for being transparent. They started saying, okay, like they would cross out the ones that didn't make it, like the goals that they weren't able to keep. And so it was like, okay, you guys, whatever, this is like, you're obviously projecting on a lot of different things, particularly like that you're going to be GPU resistant. I'm not holding a whole lot of interest. And maybe it was so bad like that. That's why eventually they did a rebrand of some kind. So I can appreciate that. I don't have like a strong major opinion on Dash either. I mean, again, other than I don't mind that these kinds of things exist, but again, it's caveat emptor, buyer beware, on a lot of that. I mean, so any other thoughts on Monero in general?
There was some praise for the ring signatures from core devs, which I always listen to. So there does seem to be something there. I don't own any Monero for if like skin in the game and all that. Like I don't own any Monero for the moment. I might buy some back. I don't feel that strongly. I guess overall, I feel pretty confident that Bitcoin is going to crack the privacy nut.
Sure.
It's going to somehow like come up with solutions that, the problem with the coin join and with mixing coins is that you have to pay for all the transactions. And that is becoming more and more expensive as everything grows.
Yeah.
So I think, probably in sidechains there'll be some kind of solution. But, that's going to take time. So it will be like a medium-term bet for me to get back in. I do want to buy some Zcash, even though there's concerns there as well. I do think that's because they've been around for a long time.
The idea is old, yeah.
No, but I mean, even the part of the technology, like back at Zero Cash, it was back in 2000. I think I looked it up, early 2013.
Yeah, Zero Coin was. Yeah, that's when the paper was originally out there.
You're right.
And then it became, now it's Zcash. But yeah, agreed. I mean, and that's kind of a funny thing. Like I've been a little, you mentioned about how Bitcoin is, how they're going to crack kind of the privacy nut. And I've heard some people say how they're going to fix it with sidechains. I'm still waiting to hear how they plan on securing the sidechains, on ramping and off ramping. I have concerns about that, but, I've heard some people say that, oh yeah, no, we got this licked. We'll lick it with a sidechain, no problem. And if they do, great. I think that's wonderful. But
isn't it ironic that like the word sidechain could be to Bitcoin what the word hard fork is to Ethereum? It's like, we'll fix it with a sidechain. It's like, well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point to bring up.
You have to be careful. Like you, the work has to be done. You can't just say like, oh, everything's going to be fixed with the sidechain.
Yeah, well, so exactly. And so this is my concern is that, in 2013, Zero Coin was a thing. Matthew Green, a bunch of different guys were ready to work with the Bitcoin developers, and the Bitcoin developers, I mean, I don't know what was exactly said, but they didn't want to go forward with it, where Zero Coin was supposed to get baked in. That was my understanding of things. If I am wrong, people, you can email me, okay? And, you can get in touch. There's plenty of ways to get in touch with me. Get me on Twitter or something and let me know how I'm wrong about this. But I was always a little concerned about that. I was like, wait a minute, why didn't they want to bake this in? It's such a great idea.
One thought that I have is I remember looking at the, one single Zero Coin transaction early on was going to be pretty huge.
Okay.
That was
maybe
the thing. Like it was going to be, they were going to take a lot of bytes. And they over time, over the years, they've been able to like shrink it by like 90%.
Oh wow!
So I think initially it was like 50 kilobytes, and now it's like 5 kilobytes or something, which is still not too small, right?
Right, but that makes sense.
Don't quote me on those numbers, but that could be one of the reasons why back in 2013 it was like, hey, this is going to be too much of a burden for the network.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. One last comment I want to make on Monero and all this, like with the bubble, and really this is true for the bubble of any altcoin that someone might get particularly passionate about. Is honestly like when people kind of get out, and it's no insult to the people that get out, but they're not really there to help build your network and build your community necessarily. Like, I mean, that's okay. When these bubbles kind of happen, if you're really excited about the technology, stick with it. I mean, that doesn't mean it's going to, ultimately succeed, but stick with it. I mean, don't worry about, speculators and all that. Again, not knocking the speculators, just saying, that life goes on. If it really, if it has something special, it'll make it.
Oh yeah.
A real genuine like price bump doesn't really bump. It's a slow, very slow build over time. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I want to get into, something that a lot of these different altcoins are kind of getting into. Well, let me ask this question first before I get into that. Like, is there an altcoin, we mentioned Zcash, is there an altcoin in particular out there maybe that does excite you in some way or other? And it's fine if the answer is no.
No. I'm like scratching.
Yeah,
back of my head.
So you got to think about it.
Literally. So Zcash has been on my radar. Monero actually has been somewhat. But yeah, man, no. Like for me, it's like I'm excited about the next thing. I'm excited about Bitcoin Hive Mind. I'm excited about the sidechain stuff that's going to come out.
Right.
I'm excited about what assets are actually going to be somehow published on the Bitcoin blockchain. Not necessarily like crowd equity funding, but like the tracking gold and this is like, I guess it's like the big goal for me. Like the big hairy goal is like actual protocols that actually make sense on top of Bitcoin. And so I feel like I've been waiting for so long.
Yeah.
And now it's like finally it's coming. So that's the thing that I'm saving my, even like financial gunpowder for as well. Like, to like diversify away from Bitcoin, but to stay in crypto. I want to look at next, second layer stuff.
Yeah.
Like sidechains.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So something I've noticed recently on Twitter that you have talked about, but if I'm putting words in your mouth, just correct me. But you'd mentioned that it wasn't something you expected to be a long-term play. It wasn't something that you really felt necessarily had legs, but you were talking about getting into Ripple, into XRP. And what was your decision about that? And then I kind of want to break into because we mentioned earlier how, a couple of years ago, Ripple was like, this is the Bitcoin killer. This is the thing that's going to do it.
Right.
Obviously, that hasn't happened. But what's going on with it now? And then I want to break down into the technology a bit.
Actually, I don't know that much about it. I have been looking into what's the deal with it, and to me, it's kind of like it's KYC coin. It's like bank coin. It's a dream for regulators because they can see everything and trace everything. And
sure.
And in the current the state of world affairs, that might be very attractive to a lot of people. Like
you might be able to make a lot of money off of it. Yeah.
Well, especially banks have a lot of burden with FATCA, and they have to basically be like, be an agent for the state and give them all kinds of information and spend millions of dollars on literally checking on their customers and following all the funds. And so if they have a mechanism to make that a lot easier, KYC coin, Ripple, then why not? They might buy into that. And then if a lot of banks plug into that system, maybe speculators will say, oh, well, let's buy some of that.
Right.
I own some Bitcoin. Let's buy some, some FETcoin as well.
Yeah. So, but what's the
trigger for me was like an announcement. They announced that they raised another round and they have more partnerships. I forget the banks, but they have basically signed up some major banks that are actual customers. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe I've never bought any Ripple in my life, and I was annoyed back when Bitstamp, back in 2011, why are they adding Ripple? But I don't know. It's if it is a cancer, it's very tenacious.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. Let's see. And I don't think it's any threat for Bitcoin at all. Yeah. It's just its own thing, and I just happen to know about it because I'm in the Bitcoin space and fintech. It's kind of part of that.
Yeah, it's just there. So you heard
very
news.
Separate, I would say.
Sure.
They don't even claim to be a real token of value. It's more like they want to.
They're heavier on being a transmitter than they are in actual money. Right. Yeah, exactly.
And to be clear, they have strayed from the original Ripple technology, which was, there was a lot of fuss about it, and Jed McCaleb left, the original, I think actually the inventor of the protocol. He left, and he started Stellar, and then Jesse Powell from Kraken was also involved early on. He was also dismayed with the Ripple team. It's definitely a very different project from how it started out.
Sure. So it's probably not even the same thing. Talking about Ripple, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. You have to be careful. Yeah.
That was, for me, I wrote off Ripple. I wrote it off right away because I was like, no, this is, this isn't going to fly. But back when it was more the original technology that we all knew and hated, or all knew. I think it was when Jed left, or it was somebody big. I'm pretty sure it was him, was trying to leave, and they wouldn't let him. They wouldn't let him cash out of XRP. And like they had control of the protocol to say, you can't, like he was going to cash out big because it would have crashed it.
You're right. They clawed back. They clawed back like $1 million worth of Ripple or something.
Exactly. And I covered it on Sovryn Tech, and I was like, fuck this technology. Because I mean,
but that's their selling position towards the regulators. It's like, this is a dream. If
we have control.
We can claw back.
Right. Yeah, and so I think that actually that segues nicely into the next subject I want to bring up with you, which is something you shared with me, a story by Christopher Allen, who it was about ID systems, because this is a big deal. Now, recently, in the past few months, there was ID 2020 that covered a lot of this stuff. I covered it on Sovryn Tech previously, and I just flipped out just by reading the website. Like I was reading what their goals are and all this stuff. And I know I have a lot of listeners that like say don't agree with, and I know this is going to sound out of left field, but that don't agree with, sex workers, prostitutes and all this stuff. And, if you don't personally care for that sort of thing, that's fine. Okay. But like, one of their goals is that we need to put a stop to prostitution and to sex workers. Like that's, they're getting, like they talked about it like it was some kind of bad thing. And I said, and I titled the episode "Blockchains are for conservatives." Because this is people, because it's
and you will never ban it. Like you're just going to push it underground, and like these women are going to be in way worse conditions than they would otherwise.
Right. But like they make it clear, this is why we need ID, so we can put a stop to these kinds of markets. Like they're telling you that ID is about control. I always say the statement, ID is for cattle, okay? And we're not cattle. Human beings, I mean, they want us to be, they, them, those. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge subject coming up. It's something big like a consensus, which is, an Ethereum, I guess you could say based. I don't know what term I want to use for that. Exactly. Consensus. Yeah, it kind of sounds like Genesis, the company that made Skynet, but whatever, we won't go there. But anyway, but this is like an Ethereum related company of sorts, and they're also the ones working heavily with Microsoft. And Microsoft now is talking about making an ID system that can jump blockchains. Microsoft and consensus. So they don't just want it to be for Ethereum. They want it to be something that is usable on every blockchain platform, whatever platform it happens to be.
Right.
And not a shock to my listeners, I totally disagree with creating this at all. There's no point. Andreas Antonopoulos does a great job of talking about it in more technical terms, saying really the reason you want ID is to mitigate default risk. Okay. Which I think is an interesting thing. And he will tell you, there's no need for ID. He says you don't have to create identity systems to mitigate default risk.
You need reputation systems? Is that what you need instead?
I'm not 100% clear on what his alternative solutions are. Okay, but bottom line being is that ID is not the direction you want to go in. Okay, and so. Christopher Allen talks about it in this great paper, and if I think of it, I will link it in the show notes because I think it was really, really well written out. But I guess I'm curious, what are your thoughts, Tur, on like everything, on all these different blockchains that are talking about wanting to implement ID? Ethereum's one of them. I'm sure there's plenty of people wanting to add it onto Bitcoin. I mean, it kind of, depending on, I guess the definition of ID is sort of ethereal in and of it's not Ethereum, but ethereal in itself, in that it's pretty broad. But I mean, how do you feel about this trend, of attaching ID to blockchains and all this?
To be honest, I don't know that much about it, but I do think that from the perspective of like people who like to organize things and organize maybe society, or people who like to kind of like, manage databases and stuff like that, it is, it's about like knowing what you're dealing with and knowing your customers. I guess I can see that, but from the perspective of the individual, more and more in a digital world, it's very important that you can control your own access to your own reputation and your own person. And like, how do you communicate that you have been great at like selling stuff and being a good guy, right? Giving, being fair, or giving people back their money when they ask you to. And so you want to I want to subject myself to the judgment of the wider. That's why I'm on social media. Like, I like that, people can just see my stuff and say if they like it or not. And the idea with ID is that there may be some numerical value there. So you can kind of like categorize people that you potentially want to work on, kind of like with Yelp, like, oh, is it a 3-star or 5-star? And then you can categorize it like from that point of view or from this point of view. So I think that's really valuable. And to me, the bottom line is that individuals should be able to control that themselves. Like, you can't steal it from people. You can't like threaten to take it away. Like, it's your reputation. It's just a bunch of information about what the market thinks about you. So I don't know. Actually, I haven't studied very much what these KYC or what identity companies want to do. I assume it's they kind of want to be good with the government, and so they're like telling the government, we're only going to work with these whitelisted people. Don't worry. Mm-hmm. And so we'll basically become an arm of you. We'll help you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my suspicion, but I don't know that much about it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think your assessment is probably pretty accurate, and I think that, or if anything, they are just to replace present governments. And that's kind of my concern is, I've talked about the idea of the tyranny of the code. Code is law, right? And yeah, I get that largely the answer is, and like that Christopher Allen paper that we mentioned, which that was his point, is that people need to be in control of this no matter what, and you don't want it to be something that Facebook can alter, just on the whim of somebody else, say, okay, no, you make it this way, or, no, you delete their account or something like this. You want it to be, distributed, decentralized, whatever. But his point was, is in the direction that you were saying. It's just that people need to be able to control it themselves. And at the end of it, he pretty much says, I don't have an exact answer, but people need to start talking about this. And, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I don't have like a great answer of how do you prove this and this and this to a person, 5,000 miles away. Okay, it's easy enough if you're like in a little community or something to where you can prove it because everybody knows everybody. Right. And maybe that's one answer, is kind of like sticking with the Dunbar number to some degree. But yeah, I mean, I worry because a lot of things that happen, regardless of the ethics behind ID, which I don't know, in Europe, I mean, this is before both you or I was born, but in the 70s, ID systems were something that was getting kind of doled out by Parliament by apartheid in South Africa. Okay, this was a huge deal, and people in this country, and you can read, on Time Magazine, all these different publications where they'll say, no, ID's terrible. This is going to foster racism. It's going to foster all this terrible stuff. You don't want to do ID systems. They don't need this. This is a bad idea. But now everybody's like, oh, please give me an ID. Give me. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of where exactly I was going to go with that, but
well, it's kind of like a privilege, and it's kind of like, well, back in the Roman Roman Empire, if you were a Roman citizen, you got lots of privileges.
Right. Yeah.
So everybody wanted an ID, even though it is a means by which the people are being controlled. But
yeah, they can be enslaved.
If you're on the top of the pyramid, you're better off than everybody else.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like that's really sort of the goal, is just to keep like empowering the people at the top of the pyramid, for them to be able to categorize and and do all of this other. Yeah, I don't really see it as a good thing. And again, I don't have the answers. I think that's the point I was getting at, is that I don't exactly have the answers on how to solve all of this. But I think restricting access to various means of human interaction. Like, one thing that's happening is where if you don't, like the idea of if you don't have a passport, okay, if you live in the United States, in certain states now, you can't get onto an airplane.
Right.
Like, I think that's ridiculous to like restrict access to, to means like that. Not that everybody has a right to be on an airplane or anything.
Yeah.
Of course not. But I think you run into some real problems with that. I think you run, even with reputation, I think you run into problems to where people game this shit, like they I mean, especially like when it's gold stars. Like, I know that like that's the kind of the popular way to do it, but like it's kind of kindergarten stuff. And in kindergarten, that was sort of the goal for a lot of people. Kindergarten is like really young, school age. That was sort of the goal, is how can I be the most popular here? And like that shouldn't really be the goal of any kind of system. Is like, how can we make this person, really, really popular, whether it's deserved or not. I mean, when you think about most people that are popular, like they're often horrendous human beings,
right?
So like popularity means nothing.
Well, to me, like reputation can also be about just like absence of criminal activity, which is like
Sure.
defrauding people and stuff like that.
Right
And
on, yeah.
I do think somehow, somewhere, there has to be possible to assign numerical values to that. At least, something that even like, especially for like the way we're going with AI and stuff, like artificial intelligence, that it should be able to look at your whatever. If you give it access to your little Bitcoin portfolio, maybe it can like, tell you things about that, or especially if it's been in a commercial context, like in the way that now there's an AI that I don't even think it's an AI, it's just maybe an algorithm that is scanning psychology papers, and it basically can find basic arithmetic errors, and it'll automatically email the author and say like, hey, you had 4 errors in your paper. And
Right.
So like, that there's value there.
Yes.
And so to me, the main thing that bothers me is monopoly. I think that's the main thing, because you can like, yeah, sure, I can see how like Amazon would have an interest in sometimes blacklisting certain people who've been like repeatedly abusing. Same for Reddit or any kind of forum or any kind of marketplace. Like that makes total sense. Or to have like a club where it's like, well, in a way like Alpha, what's it called again? Alpha, Kappa, whatever those like elite student clubs are.
Sororities and
in a way, well, but
fraternities.
especially the elite ones.
Yeah.
They have in a way a reputation or an identity/reputation based entrance system. Like you need a score above that. And I think that's especially if we're going to have business more and more with people all around the world, that is going to have value. But I think those protocols need to be open, and we need competition.
And the individual has to be able to control them.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think monopoly is the key thing here.
Right.
Is that there's really no need for everything you described, in my opinion, to achieve that. And I agree, there's value in a lot of that. You don't need to know everything about a person. You only need to know a certain segment of who that person is.
Right.
I think to access a lot of those services and those advantages. And that's really the problem, is that including with what Microsoft was talking about, where they want this, this cross-platform ID system that can work on various blockchains and all this, and that Consensus is working with. I don't know that they're necessarily thinking about the idea of, we're only going to give them access to so much. I mean, for example, not that I agree with censorship or rating systems necessarily, but, in a conventional setting, like you have movie ratings. You have rated R, rated PG, PG-13, rated G. Nothing comes out really that's rated G anymore. But, you need to go see a rated R movie, or, implicitly with a PG-13 movie, you got to be 13 or older, right, to go in. Okay. So you need to know, I mean, not saying I agree with all that, but I'm just saying that you need to know that the person is at least 13 years old, or if it's rated R, that they need to be 16 years old. You don't need to know their birth date. You don't need to know you don't even need to know that they're 13. You just need to know, okay, they're over 13. All right, good enough. Right. And so like that's all you require for identity to take advantage of, what a lot of people talk about is needed when you need an ID system of some kind. Like I said, not that I'm necessarily agreeing with that example, but I do agree with the abstract idea that you need to know very little about a person to be able to prove ownership, in my opinion. Or to be able to prove whatever you're trying to prove.
Yeah, or even like good credit, like a credit rating. Like, what does it have to show? Like it shows that you pay your bills. Yeah,
exactly. You don't need to know address, there's so many things you just don't need to know. So with ID, my own personal thought on it is, and I bring this up whenever ID systems kind of come up, is you have IBM came out with an idea back in 2007 called the identity mixer. And what this was, I don't know that it was exactly a hardware device, but I just kind of imagined that that'd be the best way to do it. It's just that you have some kind of device, or in this case, you have some kind of software or whatever, that knows what to send, like what information to send about you to prove it. Okay, and maybe this is what Microsoft and Consensus are thinking about implementing, to where it's a very broad sense of identity, but you control it all. But the reason I thought of it being like a hardware device that would transmit this data is because that way you knew you had control of it. Okay, the only way that data was getting out is if you press send on your device. So I think something along those lines is where we need to be looking. But again, that's not specific at all. And that's where the danger comes in, is with the monopoly, to where one central, system or server or whatever has all of this information about you. Just not required.
Well, and then it gets hacked and pillaged. I mean,
Exactly.
look at what's happening with medical records. It's a disaster.
Yeah, bingo. And it's so funny because I've had that argument about medical records in particular. And people have said to me, "Oh, what are you talking about? The medical system has like some of the best security in the world." I'm like, "Are you fucking nuts? You obviously don't work there because it's just not so. I mean, and it doesn't take much to you to just go to a hospital and see that they're still running Windows XP to figure that out. I mean, there's a bunch of problems with that.
I read a study recently, and there was a woman who, okay, so what they do is not just steal your medical records, they steal your medical identity.
Nah.
And so what happens then is, there was an example in the report of a woman who had she had 2 children, in real life, and her identity was stolen by a drug addict. Mm-hmm. And so this drug addict got then, with the false identity, flagged for whatever she did under influence, also involving those drugs. And the woman got in huge trouble with Child Protective Services.
Right.
So can you imagine?
Yeah.
What a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that is a nightmare. And the thing is that, it's a great example to bring up, actually, because the medical field is the one area where you probably want to give up a significant amount of information about you to be able to really pinpoint what's going wrong. But the thing is that somehow someone, and I mean, and you can, I don't know, give power of attorney or something to a kin, or a sibling or something, however that shapes up. But you need to have control over when the doctor asks for it, do you send it? Like, I mean, that's the thing for me, is that, yeah, okay, you want to be able to relinquish it at a really critical point like that. But the thing is you need to be in control of relinquishing that.
Right.
And I mean, if a person's incapacitated and you don't know what to do, that's part of that conversation where things need to get solved, I think.
If only you could control all of it, and you just send a link with like an expiration, like it just expires in a week, and you send it to the doctor.
Bingo. That's a great way of doing that.
They don't need to own it.
Sure. If you're going on vacation, you set you could have a setting to where, like, if something happened to you while you're in some part of the world, people would have access to it or something like that. But then once you're supposed to be back from that vacation, click, it goes off.
Self-sovereign identity, right?
That's the word, right? That's what Christopher Allen says. I love it. I think it's an interesting, a great way of describing it, and the importance and the potential dangers and all that. And there's a lot of them. And these things need to get figured out. I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing, is that we mentioned test nets earlier. I mean, I still think there's value in test nets. We have so much infrastructure to where we could test out so many of these ideas before making them go live. But instead, people are like, not things that have like necessarily monetary value. That's a different case, like we were describing. But like, people are just letting it run roughshod and just selling it off to VCs and everything. They're not waiting. They're not really trying out. They're not testing these things out. They're not taking, a phrase I use a lot is